Hello, hello. Welcome to the Making Hay podcast, everyone. I am super excited about our guest today, Brendan Frazier, and he is the Chief Behavioral Officer at our firm, RFG Advisory. He's the host of the Human Side of Money podcast, where he helps advisors and their clients master the emotional and psychological side of money. After starting his career as a consultant to financial advisors, he then formed his own RIA firm, and then that practice he was later hired over by RFG Advisory. Before that, though, and most recently, he built a global training platform for financial advisors to help us develop that behavioral, psychological, and emotional skill set required to serve clients at the highest level. So that's a big lots to say. What else is going on, Brendan? What do you do for fun? What's going on the personal side?
Well, thank you for the intro. As I was hearing it back, I was thinking to myself, man, I hope nobody's actually fallen asleep at this point. But there's really no room for fun in my life at this point because we've got work, marriage, 2 kids. The amount of margin we have in our lives is very, very thin. We got a third one on the way. I heard this stat on the radio as I was driving to work. Thank you. Yeah, I heard this stat on the radio when I was driving in this morning that parents say that on average they get about 31 minutes of me time per day. To which I sit there and think, yeah, but the only time I get that me time is between the hours of like 10:30 and 11 when I need to be in bed. So then it's just taking away from time that I need to be resting and sleeping. And so all that to answer your question, very little margin in my life. So what do I like to do for fun is it's always an interesting question because I sit there and I go, let's suppose I did have things that I like to do for fun. When would I actually do them? But the good news is that I have a lot of fun podcasting and speaking, and I get to do that day in and day out, which is, I guess I at least be thankful for that. I do get to do fun things.
Yeah. And it's cool that we have a career that we love and thrive in. And, I feel sorry for people that when I hear somebody say they hate their job, that's just like, oh, that's awful because I love mine so much. I feel like it's really a blessing.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. And as you know this, I ran into your podcast a couple years ago, and I was hooked. I really was. I guess you can call me it was a kind of a podcast crush,
I've had many of those myself.
I can't get enough of it. Yeah. So I had this podcast crush, and then I started getting some of your educational material, and I'm like, my clients need this. Like, I need to integrate this into my practice to serve my clients better. So I'm happy that, we're at the same place now. We have the same company we work with, and it's really super cool for me to know that you're there, and I reach out to you often. So I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and all those other times too. So, Brendan, is RFG the only firm out there that has a chief behavioral officer? I've wondered that.
That's a great question. The answer is no, but the only other notable or chief behavioral officer, I can't even say it right, which I should probably work on that. The only other one that I know of that's notable, noteworthy, and somebody that's in a similar capacity is there's a firm, for anybody that's listening, you may not have heard of them, probably haven't, but a firm called Orion, but they're not an advisory firm. They work more on the wealth tech sides, technology platform that we use as advisors. They have a guy named Daniel Crosby who's awesome and an inspiration, and somebody that at one point was a crush of mine, just to kind of come full circle. And that's now a good friend, and so we talk quite a bit. He's written a number of books, and so that's the most noteworthy one, I think. I think if you'll find that there's a few of them out there in slightly different capacities, but I think that's where RFG is sort of on the forefront in terms of prepping for success in the long term and looking at this industry over the long term into the future and saying, how do we best equip not only our firm, but also our advisors for success? And it's pretty clear and obvious that the writing's on the wall in this industry and many others, but especially this industry, where as technology continues to advance and proliferate and continue to do more and more things faster, cheaper, and more reliably than we can as humans, which oftentimes comes down to crunching numbers, that all that's going to do is amplify the importance of being able to create a human connection with somebody, right? And being able to better
Absolutely.
understand people and their emotions and behavior. And so I think they're looking out, and we are looking out into the future and saying, what is it that we need to do to adapt for this future that's probably coming quicker than we think? And so I was the benefactor of that. And they said, hey, we probably need somebody to come and educate our clients, our advisors on this aspect of money that is there, but nobody really ever talks about. We all know that it exists, but nobody ever really teaches us about it or tells us about it. So I think it's one of those deals where they're getting positioned to thrive in a dynamic, but soon to be changing in industry.
Absolutely. Well, I know all about what you do. Like I said, I've been following you for quite some time. But for our listeners who may be new and don't know you, they don't know what a CBO is, a Chief Behavioral Officer. Like, tell us exactly what your role is and why is it important to us advisors, but also to the clients?
Yeah, so I think I would imagine pretty much everybody listening to this is probably wondering, from how does it benefit me? How does it help me? Or for somebody that is a client, what's the benefit to them? So it's sort of a trickle down effect where I get the opportunity to impact or work with both advisors and their clients. And so the first and foremost, above all else, is it requires quite a bit of education, right? Putting out content, creating education, creating awareness that despite the fact that we've been told, but despite the fact that the majority of your life, everything you've ever learned about money has had to do with numbers and spreadsheets and formulas and calculations and logic, that's not the entire equation. That, like I said a minute ago, there's this whole other emotional side, behavioral aspect, of psychological piece that's just as important and factors in just as much in determining your financial outcomes that you don't ever really get taught about. Like, you can go find a textbook or a book or listen to a podcast on money management and financial management, and odds are you'll get through the whole thing and it just assumes that you're a perfectly rational human that can plug numbers into a spreadsheet and run future value calculations, and that's all you need. But it doesn't take into account the fact that we're human beings with emotions, with feelings, with biases that come up. And so number one is just education, getting the word out there to everybody that, hey, there is more to this money game than just being able to crunch numbers and look at a spreadsheet, right? That the way you behave is just as important and influential on your money as it is the spreadsheets that you can create. That's number one. And then number two, as far as more directly, right? Like I get to work with our advisors and say, hey, here's how you can bring this element into the work that you do with clients. So that's sort of a trickle down effect. Work with the advisors. They figure out how to incorporate it in the work that they do with clients. There's a multiplier effect there. But then also creating content, videos, and going out and doing some speaking for clients to be able to say, like, hey, when you're wondering, why is it that I can't do what I'm supposed to do with my money? Why is it that I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't actually follow through? Helping them go, you know what, it's okay. It's not because I don't want to. It's because of this other reason, this emotional reason, this psychological reason, and normalizing it, and then just letting them know, hey, here's why this is happening, but here are some things you can do about it. So that's and I could keep going, obviously, with some more examples, but if we look at it just at a high level, it's a lot of like, hey, it's a focus on education, awareness, because that's where it starts, but then diving deeper into let's say that's the case, what are the things we need to know to do something about it?
Yeah, it's kind of like, as I'm listening to you, it's kind of like one of those things that advisors and clients both need, but they don't know they need it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we are told constantly as advisors, we have to do our continuing education and all these things. I spent last Thursday and Friday actually in a classroom, 2 days of, intense tax, IRA, estate planning, understanding the laws of the Secure Act, the final regulations there, and how that impacts our clients, required minimum distributions, the whole gamut. And that's important to do that. It's so important. We have to have that knowledge to be able to, meet with a client and give them the right advice. But I think, in my opinion, if we don't incorporate the human side of that and the emotional coaching and, understanding why they don't do or they do whatever, decision they made, we're really doing a disservice. So I think it's super cool what you do, and I want more of it. And it's kind of hard though to unbreak the habits of just telling them all this stuff that as financial advisors we love to hear about. We live and breathe this every day. We have acronyms for everything,
right?
And most of them, their eyes are glazed over. By the time you have a conversation with them.
So. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And to your point about. This is just a principle for life in general, but also business in general, which is oftentimes people don't know exactly what they need. Like we think we know what we want, but we don't know what we actually really need. So sometimes you have to give people what they want and slip in the things that they need, because they don't raise their hand and say, yeah, I really need somebody to make sure that I don't make mistakes. I screw up all the time. I need somebody to make sure that I don't screw up. Like you go and you're like, hey, why are you working with a personal trainer? Like, well, because I really want to lose weight and I want to get in better shape. But like what people don't say, at least not right off the bat, is, well, because if I try working out on my own, I don't do the same workouts that I should. I really need somebody to make sure that I get up in the morning, hold me to the hour-long workout, make sure I put max effort in, because if left to my own devices, I'm not going to do it. And so that's ultimately what I really need. But what they think that they're getting is somebody that can help them get in shape, lose 20 pounds, and feel more fit. So it's this balance between like, just recognizing sometimes what people want isn't necessarily what they need. We have to find ways to slip in what they need. So as far as this emotional side of money, psychological, behavioral, however you like, you can tell I keep going through these three things, right? Behavioral, emotional, psychological. That's why I just always revert back to the human side in hopes that it encapsulates the entire spectrum, all three. When I would work with advisors, I would hear them say all the time that this human side is maybe at times more important or more prevalent than the numbers side, right? It was just this common sentiment from one advisor to the next. You'd hear it all the time. But you go ask people, you go ask human beings, right? Like, hey, do you think that there's like this emotional side to money? Do you think it can be emotional? Like nobody says no, right? They all recognize that it's there, just nobody really knows what to do about it. In fact, there's a study done that shows that 90% of money decisions are driven by emotion, which is just kind of a crazy number to think about. It's like, okay, so the vast majority of decisions that I'm making around money are driven by emotion, whether I recognize it or not. So my whole thing is like, well, why don't we like take that and learn about it so that we can be aware of it and know that those things are happening. So yes, it's out there and it's there. I have a good friend named Brian Portnoy. He wrote a book called The Geometry of Wealth. He works in this space as well. Great guy, smart guy, who he says this is sort of like gravity, where you can choose whether to acknowledge it or not, but it's there and it's going to affect you no matter what decision you make. And that's how I look at this human side of money. You don't have to acknowledge it, but you want to be aware of it, because whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, it's there and it's going to impact the decisions that you make in your financial situation and outcomes either way.
Exactly. So give us like some examples of it. I work with veterinarians and, whether they're a new grad, they're coming out of school, or they've accumulated money and they're in retirement. How does one change, like they've accumulated money and they're changing over to now they need to spend it and live off of it. Like, how does that mindset shift happen? I mean, give us an example there.
Yeah. Now the classic scenario that involves not logic but emotion, that involves not money but like somebody's mind, is the example that you just gave, which is, hey, how do I go from saver to spender? Right? How do I go my whole life I've been taught to save, right? And just to be clear, like, let's go ahead and get this out there. There is a social norm and a social pressure that just exists for some reason, that we praise saving and at the same time we bash or criticize spending, right? And not everybody, but by and large, like we're like, oh, you can save, that's amazing, you get a badge of honor. Oh, you go out and spend on something, like that's a scarlet letter. Why would you do that? Why would you buy first class plane tickets when you could just fly coach and you get to the same destination? And I'm not saying everybody should buy first class plane tickets, right? But we have this just general social praise and badge of honor for saving that doesn't apply to spending. And so, number one, it's easy to get to the point where you're like, hey, I'm saving, I'm doing great. Right? If I'm saving, I'm winning. If I'm saving, I'm winning. And then you get to the point after a number of years where you've built this habit, you've done it for years and years and years, you've wired your brain to believe that saving is winning, that if you can save, you're better off, that saving is now becomes part of your identity too, by the way. You're like, I'm doing this well. And then all of a sudden, it gets to the point where you go, all right, I'm not working anymore. I don't have any income. Now I need to go tap into this thing, this account over here that I haven't tapped into, that's been growing, that I've told myself is like part of my identity and what I do well. And it can be really, really painful to see that, to go into that account, take money out and watch it go down. And it makes all the sense in the world. I don't criticize or judge anybody for it. The problem is that you saved all of that money to use at a future point. And now it's like, hey, you've got all this money. If you don't use it, something's going to happen to you. So the framework I like to think through and kind of preach all the time is, if there's one concept around money you want to remember as far as in terms of how do you best apply it to your life, it's this. Your money's going to get used. Every dollar in your bank account, if you envision your account or your accounts right now, every dollar to your name, every dollar in your accounts is going to be used in one of two ways. It's either going to get used for you to live, or you're going to give it to somebody else. Either use it to live or to give. And there's no other option. Like every dollar in your account, bar none, gets used in one of those two ways. And so we want to be intentional with how we're doing that. How are we using money? Are you okay if you don't use that money to live? Are you okay giving it to someone or something else or the government? Right? Like, it's not going to be yours. You're giving it to someone else. Is that okay? Right. And it's not as simple as that. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what it boils down to. Is there's no simple way to go from I'm a saver to I'm okay spending more money. It's one of the hardest things to overcome, one of the hardest challenges we deal with in working with clients. But I'll just kind of wrap up that, because this could be a whole episode in and of itself. Look into it and researched it for years and years and years. And I've got lots of thoughts. If I was going to break it down to the single most tactical thing you can do to try to get over the hump, and this could apply whether you've been saving for years and you're having to tap into retirement, or it could apply to the person who is a saver and has a hard time spending, right? Let's say it's the person that they've saved way more than they even need according to these calculations and projections and financial planning situation. And they still go to the grocery store with a handful of coupons, or they still go and they're like, I don't know if I want to buy those $8 strawberries. I want to buy the $6 strawberries. And it's like, that's not bad. But if you're sitting there stressing about those decisions, and meanwhile, there's things you can be doing with your money to live a better life, one of the most tactical things you can do is leverage the power of mental accounting to your advantage. And what that looks like is you basically create an entirely separate account at whatever bank that you use, create a whole new account, name it something that you've always wanted to do but never done. So it could be, let's say, family Disney World experience. Save a portion of your money into that account. Say, I'm going to tap into this this is 2024, in 2026. And you know that in 2026, the money that's in there has been allocated to going on a family Disney World experience. And if you allocated it to that and you know that it's over there for that purpose, it's not as hard to watch the money be taken out and used for that, because you know that's the purpose for the money. So that's one like really tactical way to try to overcome this, like, I don't necessarily want to spend, I need to save barrier. That's not uncommon in a lot of situations, or for a lot of people.
Right. I've experienced that so much. And just, after 25 plus years in the business, seeing my clients, become 70, 75, 80, 85, even in their 90s, and they have so much more money than they had, when they were younger, that they could have, had all these life experiences and they didn't. And so I'm on a mission to try to fix that, give it away for goodness sakes while you're alive, to see someone enjoy it in your family, or give part of it away. One of the things we do really well as financial advisors is we create plans. We're all in the details, creating this plan. So basically, as you were talking about the bank account, I'm like, we do that on the large scale. We create this whole, we have this fancy financial planning software, and we create this plan, and then make these recommendations. And then when the magic number comes up to tell us how successful the plan is, like it's from 0 to 100, if you've never had this done before. And, we really wanted to get it, in the 90 to 95 range or something like that, or 85 to 95. And, if they're getting much over 90, I'm telling them, like, you're going to leave so much money on the table. You've got to find something. What do you really want to do? But you can tell them all these things. You can even talk to them about how to invest the dollars. Let's put a bucket of money over here for your grandkids. Is it important? You find out their grandkids are real important to them. Well, let's invest some of the money pretty aggressively because that's legacy money. And they'll sit there and agree with you. They see that their plan is still successful, and then, well, the election's coming up, or, CD rates are 4% now. It's so hard to get them off the table sometimes, not with all people, but because they carry those, those behaviors in. And so just trying to uncover them where the person can see, it's a cool experience. And sometimes it's like, if it's a husband and wife, in the meeting, maybe one of them is having this aha moment. And I love it, and they're seeing that, hey, we could really do something different here. We could really make a difference in the lives of our families, or we could have some experiences that maybe we didn't think we could. Maybe we grew up as, middle class people who didn't travel much. Maybe we can take those trips. So, I love it when that plan works, but I don't know if you have any help around getting them to actually take advice when they won't take the advice, and we're sitting there showing them all the logical things here. These are the tools that tell us that this is what's going to happen. And you still can't, necessarily get them, well, let's just go very conservative, or what? That's just an example.
First of all, as human beings, we don't have an information problem. We have an execution problem. In other words, we don't have any issue with knowing what to do. The problem is actually following through and doing it. For example, if you look at whenever I give this presentation in front of an audience, like you say, you've got hundreds of people in the room, you're like, okay, raise your hand if you have the perfect marriage, you're in perfect shape, running the perfect business, raising perfect kids. Right. And then, like, every now and then you'll have one person that still raises their hand, and it's like, okay, well, that person, they can just go ahead and leave because they've got it all figured out. Why would they need to be here? But for the most part, nobody raises their hand, right? And it's not because there isn't a plethora of information out there on how to raise kids, how to live in a happy marriage, how to run a successful business, and how to get in great shape. Like, there's literally endless amounts of information on how to do all of those things, right? But we don't need more information. Like, we know how to do that. Meanwhile, like, obesity rates are higher than they've ever been. Business failure rates are like 70%. 50% of people get divorced, and 0% of people raise perfect kids, right? So we need to figure out, okay, we don't need more information. So knowing what to do is different than actually doing it. And this goes for all areas of life. Like, the medical field they've done studies where they can give people their prescriptions to change their lives, and they don't actually take their prescriptions or follow through with it. So this isn't just a money problem. This is just an overall behavior change problem where we can know what to do, but we don't actually do it. It's why I still have love handles, despite the fact that I know I need to eat better, eat less, and work out more. Like, the formula to get rid of the love handles is not that hard, but it doesn't mean that I can just do it. Right.
Yeah.
So here's all. Okay. So that was my little rant. As far as I say, I don't call it, it's not really a rant. It's just, I want people to know that, like, it's not your fault. You're probably thinking, if I could just learn a little more, if I had a little more information, then I could change my behavior. But that's not the problem. The amount of information, you need a certain amount of information, and that's important, but it's not sufficient. So how do you help yourself do the thing that you want to do, or avoid doing the thing that you don't want to do? So number one, first and foremost, is get really, really clear on why you're doing something. Like really dive in and think about it, uncover what's the purpose of me doing this? What's the reason behind it? So for me, for example, when it comes to working out, my motivation isn't because I want to look good, lose weight. My main motivation, like the underlying motivation behind that, why I want to do it, is because I've got 2 boys. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not getting more energy as I get older, but at no point do I want to feel like I can't be present and active and engage with them for as long as I'm alive. And so I work out so that I can like live longer, be more present, and be physically engaging with these two boys. Right. And like that carries more meaning than say waking up and say my alarm goes off like it did this morning at 5:30, which by the way, some people are like 5:30. I get up at 4:30. I'm not a morning person. So my alarm goes off at 5:30. And if I'm like, I don't lose 25 pounds, like that's mildly motivating, I suppose. Probably not really that motivating, but being like, you want to live long so you can be present and active with your boys, like that actually gets me out of bed. Right. So just different levels of motivation. Number two, and there's been studies that link financial success to this, but just in general, the more clarity you have around something, the more likely you are to follow through and do the thing that you want to do. So for example, instead of just saying, you know what, we want to create, we want to go, we want to take more trips as a family. Like that's good. That's not bad. But how do you take that and turn it into a vivid vision with clarity? And it would be like, well, we would really love to go on a 2-week trip to Italy. We want to take our grandparents with us. We want to do these cooking classes while we're over there. We want to spend a little time at the beach. We want to make sure that we get some time to do a vineyard tour and drink some wine. And as you add more clarity to the picture, clarity changes behavior. So that's number two. Number three is basically small wins that create big momentum. And so the idea here is whatever it is that you want to do. So for me, the thing I talk about and preach about this all the time. And there was a day a couple of years ago where we were looking at, we were moving houses. And so our mortgage broker was like, hey, I need you to send in all this information. And it had been like 3 weeks and I still hadn't sent anything. And it was like, I knew what I needed to do, but I wasn't doing it. And so I was like, okay, what's the next smallest step that I could take to get this done, right? Not upload all your documents, but like, what's the one next thing I need to do? And so I was like, all right, tonight, when the kids go to bed, I'm going to go get our tax return and upload the tax return. Like one of the many documents that they needed, but it was like a small step. And once I had done that one thing, then it created this momentum, and doing the rest of it took me like a day, right? But it was one small step that created a lot more momentum. And so the example that James Clear uses in the book Atomic Habits is he's like, don't go out and try to run 3 miles or 5 miles. Just make your goal to put your shoes on and step outside and then start running and then see how far you can get. So like small wins create big momentum. So number one, tap into your real personal why, your real motivation. Number two, create clarity. And then number three, small steps or prioritize progress over completion.
That's good. That's really good. We talk a lot about purpose and, like I try to help my clients understand, like, what is the purpose of this money? What's what is it that you want to have happen in your life? I mean, I like to call it maximizing your life, not just your wealth, and, breaking those bad habits like you were talking about and so forth. But like, how do we help clients? How would a client figure out what their purpose is? Like, I love what you're saying on why you get up in the morning. Yeah, you want to live for your kids, otherwise you'd stay awake, drink 2 bottles of wine instead of 1 and then not be able to get up. And you know what I mean? Like you define that. And so that's always in the back of your mind, even if you disappoint or don't do what you've told yourself you're going to do one day. That's okay, because overall it's part of who you are. You've defined that. And sometimes I see clients having an issue with like figuring out what their purpose, like, what is the purpose of this money? Well, we just don't want to run out. They can't they're just vague. And, so 2-part question. So that, and then, maximizing your life and experiences, not just your money. I think that's kind of an unusual thing for a financial advisor to talk about. I think people that have podcast crush on Brendan Frazier and the human side of money, they might not think it's weird, because that's what we talk about, right? That's what you talk about. Right, so, right. We're used to it. But I think that's just such a concept that, people should get used to listening, coming from their financial advisor. And what I see in working with the veterinarians, and this podcast is for veterinarians, all things money, all things veterinarians, how to make their life better, is like, I meet a new grad or a fairly new grad, and, they've been in school for, 8 years or so, and they just want to enjoy their life. So they are all about the experience, right? They're not really, they think they have time to kick the can down the road and not save money. And I try to bring that approach in if why can't we do both? So I want you to hit on that in a second. And then the ones that are older that have accumulated the money, a lot of times I find that they still feel kind of unfulfilled in their lives, and they can't answer that question around what's the purpose of this money, and to accumulate it, so, or to help my family. They're just vague, and I don't know if it's fear driving it. I'd love you to, as we wrap up, like talk about those couple of things. I know that's kind of a lot, but I know you talk fast and you can handle it.
Well, and I think these two things can actually be tied in together. So, and I think here's how I'll say it. I'll say it like this. Like you said, and I believe it and say it all the time too, that at the end of the day, nobody actually wants to maximize their wealth. You just want to maximize your life. And it just so happens that your money is a tool to do that. So money is a tool to fund the life that you want to live. I think that's the main message that I would try to get across to anybody is money it's great and it can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it should be a tool to fund the life that you want to live. Because if we look at it like this, that actually, so there's a quote that says, I'll explain it. There's a quote from Mark Manson, and he says that there are two paths in life. Either you choose to live it intentionally or it will be chosen for you. And so I was like, you know what? That's a good point. I'm going to do a slight variation of that. Not going to quite call it my own because I feel like it's way too close to his, but I'm going to try to make it my philosophy, which is there's two outcomes with money. Either you choose to use it intentionally or it will be chosen for you. In other words, you can either choose to use money to fund the life that you want to live. And by figuring out, hey, what are the things that are important to me? What are the things that I want to do? What are the things that bring me happiness, meaning, and fulfillment? Or if you don't do that and spend time and have the space to do that, then your money decisions are going to be determined for you by things like the people that you associate with, people that you live around, keeping up with the Joneses, the role models that you look up to, what you learned about money during your upbringing from your mom, your dad, your uncle, your grandparents. It could be from your faith. And those things may or may not be bad. There could be really good money lessons that you learned, but there may not be. And so you want to take that, and until you're aware of them, it's going to drive your decisions for you. So you either choose to use it intentionally or those things are going to choose how you use money. So I say all that to say, how do you actually use money intentionally? How do you make sure that you're using and spending money as a tool to fund the life you want to live? What does that life look like? How can I get clear on what that life looks like? There's a number of ways to do it. If you want to do it in the most, we'll call it not systematic way, but in a more structured way, then you would go through some sort of exercise like using a set of values cards. And you would go and there's a number, you can just Google this, right? And get a values exercise. And you can figure out how to go through it. Now, I always highly encourage going through it with a third party, with somebody else that can help you think through and process and talk through what it is that you're picking, what it is that you're looking at, why you're choosing it. But if you're not into that, you just want to test it out, you can go through and do it on your own. And that's going to bring to the surface the things that are truly most important to you in your life. So I did this actually on the podcast a few episodes ago. There's an advisor on who took me through it. And I sit here and talk about this stuff all the time, think about it all the time. Have been through a couple of these exercises, but sitting there and doing it with an advisor and having them walk me through it was truly like this. It's my favorite episode I've ever done. It was like an eye-opening experience. I still have the paper. I'm holding it here that we went through where I identified my 5 main core values so that I could look at it and go, okay, what are the things that are truly most important? I think that is the most effective way to do it, but that requires quite a bit of effort and space, and ideally somebody to guide you through that conversation. If you want a quick, easy appetizer version to help open your mind to how can I identify these things, then I think there's a couple questions you can ask yourself, right? One would be, why is money important to you? Why is it important? Whatever your first answer is not the full answer. So whatever you come up with first, go, okay, but why is that important? And then the second answer will be getting closer. The third answer is probably the actual answer. But another way that I like to do it that I think is maybe even more powerful is to ask, imagine that you woke up tomorrow and you had $50 million in your bank account. Like you woke up and you log into your account, there's $50 million sitting there. First of all, ask a couple questions, make sure it's legit before you go and spend it. Well, let's assume that it is. And then we say, all right, you can't save it. I mean, you can't save it and you can't invest it. What would you do with that money? Well, I can already tell you, everybody listening, their thoughts go to, I would pay off debt, especially if they're veterinarians and doctors. I would pay off my debt. I would probably maybe take a vacation or two and help out my family. Like, those are like the most common answers. So you go, okay, great. Do all of those things. You've still probably got, I don't know, at worst case scenario, about $48 million left to spend. What would you do with it? All right. So the idea is when we think about money, we place constraints on ourselves. So the idea is to say, hey, by removing these constraints, think big. What would you do if you had that amount of money and no constraint? And it doesn't mean that you're going to have that amount of money, but what it does, it uncovers what's important to you. So I'll give you an example. Whenever I got asked that question, my first response was I'd get a private jet. And it's like, okay, all right, that's good, but I didn't actually get $50 million. So all of a sudden this doesn't feel so fun anymore, right? I'm like, now I'm just hallucinating. But then it was sort of like, okay, but what would you do with that private jet? Well, my sisters and my parents live in 3 different places, and it's kind of a long drive to get there. So I would use this private jet to be able to fly and see them more often, right? Without the hassle of doing it. And so you boil it down to, okay, so you don't actually want a private jet. You just want to be more intentional and be able to spend more time with your family. And you go, yeah, it's not about the jet. It's about family. So then I go, all right, well, I can't have a private jet, but what can I do to spend more time with my family? Well, we can plan more trips and allocate the money towards it. So that's one thing, is to remove the money constraint and figure out what is it that you want and why you want it. The second piece of it, we also tend to believe like, well, we do this someday thinking where we go, hey, well, I'll do it someday. I'll get around to it someday. Well, nothing brings you into the present quite like putting a time constraint on it and saying, okay, let's say you had $50 million. Like now you've got that, but you've only got 5 years to spend it, or you've only got 5 years to live. How would that change things? Would you still keep working? Would you still keep doing the job that you're doing? Would you go visit your family? Like, what things come up in that example? And nothing provides clarity around what's most important in life than removing a money constraint and a time constraint and pairing those together. And the things that are most important rise to the surface really, really quickly.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So I'm a big quote fanatic. As we wrap up here, tell me those 2 quotes again. The one that your quote and the other quote about it's either chosen for you or you. Yes.
So there are 2 possible outcomes in life. Either you choose to use it intentionally or it will be chosen for you. So then my version of it, I'm going to call it my version, but it's basically Mark Manson's quote, is there are 2 possible outcomes with money. Either you choose to use it intentionally or it will be chosen for you.
Awesome. And you know why, when it's chosen for you, why people don't complain is because they're not here to complain about it. So just as a footnote there,
yes,
you know
right,
what I mean?
Right,
like,
exactly, yes.
Like that's why we don't have a lot of complaints going around here, you know?
That's right.
Fascinating show. We touched on a lot of things. I thought it was very interesting. Hopefully our listeners will, and they want more information about how they can kind of get clarity in their own financial situation. That would be the goal. So for sure, we'll put all of your information, Brendan, up because other people may want to listen to The Human Side of Money, follow you on LinkedIn and the other sources as well. And I thank you for joining us today. If anyone wants to reach out to me, my phone number is 205-795-2013. Thank you guys for listening to Making Hay.